Welcome.
To the joy of coding.
Hello, and welcome to episode 275 of The Joy of Coding. My name is Mike Conley. It's so good to see you. It's January 19th, 2022, second episode of a new year. Going to be hacking on some Firefox stuff today. I'm hoping that my stamina is now more up to speed. Last week I kind of got tired. I started to fade a little bit, so I'm hoping that this week I'll do a better job of sticking with it and making it for the entire hour and a half. I am using a new way of cutting out my background. I figured out how to get the OBS background remover plugin to work, and so now I'm using all of the tips and tricks. I've got my fancy microphone, I've got this auto tracking camera, and I'm using this background remover. And I'm not sure, like, it's flipping around a lot, like it's having a hard time with my hand here. And I don't know whether or not this is distracting or not, but let me know in the comments whenever, I'm just trying this stuff out. Anyways, let's get started. What are we doing today? So yeah, today is January 19th, 2022, episode 275, and a reminder that no plan survives breakfast. I think I know what I want to work on today. I think I know what I want to focus on, but I don't know how it's going to go. It might go horribly wrong. We might get sidetracked, sidelined. We might, end up, deep in a rabbit hole where, we don't get any answers, or maybe we figure some stuff out. Unsure. So we'll just see how it goes, but... just stick with me. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that the agenda that we're looking at, with all the fancy links that you might want to click on, is something that you have access to. If you're watching this on Air Mozilla, check out the details section of this video. If you're watching this on YouTube, check out the video description. If you're watching this on my website, mikeconley.ca/JOC, there's a link in the top somewhere for the agenda. And if you're watching this on Twitch, then let me just drop the agenda into the Twitch chat. There you go. Let me know if you got that. I think I've got the Joy of Coding Bridge bot working with Matrix and Twitch. Let me know if that's not working, because I'm very curious, because I think I got it up and running. All right, so what are we doing today? I want to fast forward and get right into the guts of things. What are we doing today? So the first thing I want to actually mention is that I'm going to plug a talk that I'm doing. I'm doing a talk at FOSDEM. If you're not familiar with FOSDEM is sort of a free open source developers conference that typically happens live in Europe. It's a bunch of developers get together in Europe to talk about free and open source software. Normally they would gather in Brussels, I guess. Because of the pandemic that we are currently living in, it's happening online right now. So it might be a little distracting with my background. I apologize. It's, I think it has a hard time with the fact that I'm not looking directly at it. It's trained in order to cut out faces that are looking at it, but I always am looking a little bit off to the side, so it's probably having a harder time, recognizing me. Maybe I'll do more to try and face the camera. Maybe that'll be helpful. I think it's having a hard time with my shirt. Maybe it doesn't like that I have different colored shirt. At any rate, so I'm doing a talk at FOSDEM, and I want to plug that real quick. And there are a couple other talks. Let's take a look at the Mozilla booth, in air quotes, because, again, it's virtual this year. So the Mozilla booth, there's a bunch of really great stuff going on. Some of it's Firefox related. Some of it is not, but it's still Mozilla related. So, for example, I'm doing Firefox Desktop Development 101. So I actually, if you are a watcher of the stream, you've seen me talk about this stuff before. I basically go through a presentation for, how newcomers can think about, newcomers who are working on Firefox full time, basically. It's a talk I give to people who are new hires who are going to be working on Firefox that helps sort of orient them in the code and where they are in the organization. And it's very, very rudimentary, introductory, here's a little taste of Firefox desktop development. And I've done that talk actually on the stream. I did it a couple of episodes back at the end of 2021. And I did it again for FOSDEM, and I'll be doing Q&A afterwards. So that might be interesting. There's also a talk here on SearchFox. There's one here on Common Voice and Thunderbird. Sumo. There's another one here on Common Voice. Virtual reality data visualizations for the browser. I'm actually not familiar with this project. Common Voice again. This one's on like community and strengthening the community, and this one's on fox fooding, so testing. So there's a lot of stuff here, and some of it I'm actually really interested in. What's Bobbia XR? So for VR stuff in the browser. Yeah, I'm really not familiar with this work, but check it out if any of this is interesting. I should point out, I believe FOSDEM, for like attending and viewing these talks, it's free. So what happens is you just kind of like go to the links on the day that like the presentation is happening, and what's going to happen is that the talk will be streamed, and you will be able to watch the stream, the recording, because all the presentations are pre-recorded, and then afterwards you can have Q&A going on in the background. I think in Matrix there's like a dedicated Matrix channel for Q&A, and then afterwards there'll be like a live Q&A in case people have questions that they want to ask myself or any of the other presenters. Right. Well, that's my brief plug for FOSDEM. So you should check it out. It's free. Now, what did I want to work on today? So I got neat infoed on a bug recently, and it's a pretty complicated one. And I want to. I'm not working on the bug per se, but I was asked a question on how to approach it, and I don't actually know. So I'm not assigned to work on this bug, but I want to help the person who is working on this bug come up with the right solution, which is, that's kind of the role of a teammate. Is like, you don't always just work on your own. Sometimes someone asks you for help, and you come in and you kind of do an analysis on your own, and you come up with maybe a path forward for your teammate, because it's a team activity. Despite the fact that we all work on our editors individually, software development for a piece of software as large as something like Firefox is a team activity. Now, in the background, I am doing a build. This build is almost done, and hopefully my battery holds out. One of the consequences of having this really cool AI-powered camera that follows me around, I guess, is that it needs to use one of my very precious USB-C ports that normally I charge with, and it doesn't work with my USB-C hub for reasons that are not clear, and so I have to do slow charge, and especially when I'm building, that really draws a lot of power. Like I draw power from my battery, so we'll see how it goes. Hopefully my battery lasts. I am in the process of trying to identify a good USB-C hub that lets me do full 90-watt charging of my MacBook Pro, while also offering a bunch of like the peripheral USB ports and Ethernet and all that good stuff. Anyway, so what is this bug? Let's not talk about charging. Let's talk about this bug. Whoopsie daisy. Where is the link to the bug? It's right here. So I will copy that link, and if you follow along in the agenda, you can find it yourself. I'm seeing some chatter. It's free, so I guess, Danny Colin, you're talking about FOSDEM. They're using Matrix again this year, so you can connect it with your Mozilla.org account. And Ocris is able to reproduce this bug already, 1681712. This is a bug that's been around for a while. I think this was filed a year ago, and I'll try and demonstrate the bug. We're almost done this build, and I can demonstrate the bug, but I might actually be able to do it right now in my nightly. So here's the bug. You know how whenever you right click on text, you can right click and choose copy. You can copy the text to your clipboard. Well, suppose I open a tab and go to somewhere. Let's see if I go to like this Atlantic article, and you can still do that. You right click and copy, so everything works. Now suppose I tear this window out. Now if it plays like a Bing sound, don't worry about that. That's just some diagnostic stuff that I have built into my browsers. Don't worry about that. But I'm going to tear out the tab. Yeah, that's the Bing. And now let's try and select some text here and right click. Now notice that copy is blurred out. I cannot copy the text. It won't let me do it. If I defocus and refocus the window, then I can do it. But after I tear out the tab, I can't do it immediately after. So what is going wrong here? And there's been a long analysis in this bug. And I don't want to read all of it out loud. There was like a bunch of back and forth about like who can reproduce this, what are the detailed STR, who knows how any of this might work. Neil Deacon, one of my colleagues who really knows how focus works in the browser, he came in and did a deep dive analysis, and I'll read his comment here. So listen up. So he says the issue here is that when you drag a tab into its own window, the focus manager, which is the service, it's a component in the parent process. Well, actually, it exists in multiple processes, but the main one's in the parent process. The focus manager member active browsing context in Chrome gets cleared, but never assigned a value, despite the fact that the browser in the new window is assigned as the current focused element. Excuse me. This means that the check to see whether the commands are enabled gets a null value and thinks that the Chrome of the window is focused instead and not the actual browser window. One can work around the issue by focusing another window and back again. Note that with Fission enabled, this bug does not occur. Now, that was from a year ago. And then there was some more analysis by Henry, and then Neil came back. The browser element is focused in a new window via set initial focus in browser.js. You might also see calls from a just focus after tab switch, which happens on switching to a new tab. When I try, though, mFocused element is always set correctly. And then there's a little bit more back and forth, and then it turns out that in the failure case, when the Zool frame gets focused, there's an about blank doc there, so the focus goes in there. The about blank doc is created as a side effect of that. It seems that wrapping the outer window, blah, 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 back to Neil. So Neil has this much longer comment, and this is, I think, where the real guts of the bug are. Hey, thinker. The sound is cool. Oh, the blink sound, the boom sound. I'm glad you like it. So here's Neil's big comment, and this is this is a long comment, but it is a deep analysis of what is actually happening here. So I think it's really important that we absorb and understand this, because this is basically going to be our guide for figuring out the right way forward, I think. So a thing to keep in mind about Neil, he's a very seasoned Mozilla engineer who knows our focus stuff deeply. And the thing that he asked me for in this bug is more about tab switching, which he's less familiar with. So I think my suspicion is that neither of us have the full picture in our heads. He has the focus picture in his head, and I have the tab switching picture in my head. And so somehow between the two of us, I think the solution is somewhere in the middle. Like somewhere, if we combine our information, there's going to be an answer in there. And unfortunately, focus and tab switching are two very complicated parts of the browser. So it might be a little bit of a hard go, but we'll see. So he does a good job of describing what happens whenever the tab tearout succeeds correctly and copying from the to the clipboard via the context menu works, and then when it fails. So that's the first thing to keep in mind here, is that this is an intermittent problem. This is not this is a non-deterministic problem, I should say, where it's not guaranteed to happen every time. It has some kind of relationship with some asynchronous activity that's occurring that might get interrupted or might get interfered with by either user input events or other system events, something like that, such that the conditions change. Conditions change either some event comes in or some thread interrupts or something goes on to make it so that sometimes it succeeds and sometimes it fails. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when it succeeds. So he's talking about when you drag the tab out. And dragging a tab out, actually, maybe I'll start there, because I think that's important to sort of get a foundation understanding of what that action, what's actually happening under the hood. So maybe I'll start there. Let me switch over to my drawing tablet. Maybe will the camera follow me? It will. Oh, so handy. Okay, so here's, and I'm sorry, it's really not happy with my headphones either, I think. and my forehead is getting blurred through. Okay, so when you have a tab, let's say you've got a window here, a browser window with a couple of tabs. And let's say you, this is a tab. Whoops, what happened? Why is that all blurry? Come on, do I have the pencil? I've got the pencil selected. Okay, and let's say you tear it out. Now, what happens under the hood, this is a multi-step operation, is that a new window gets created. We haven't torn out the tab yet, so like the content, I'm going to put the smiley face to represent the content. The content is still here at this point, but we create a new empty tab. So I'm going to use X for empty, and we create a new window with that tab in it. And then what happens is that our code switches the contents. It swaps the content from one to the other. So a swap occurs where, you know, here, can I erase now? No, I don't have the eraser set up, I guess. Okay, so then the blank stuff and all of the data associated with the blank stuff ends up going here, and the stuff that you wanted to tear out goes out here, and that includes like the title and like all of the data for it. It ends up getting swapped. So that's the first step. And then the second step is that we close this tab. So this tab ends up going away, and we find the most appropriate tab to switch to, which I'm just going to pick for an example will be this one. So a tab switch occurs where this tab has been closed, it's gone, boop boop, and then we're down here with the 3 tabs instead. 1, 2, 3, and we've got this one selected. This one here at the front, and this will be like tab 2, and that's how tab tearout works. And so that's where the tab switch that's occurring is this right here. This is the whole nuts and bolts of this problem, I think, has to do with this action of switching the tab in the background and the asynchronous activity of creating a window and doing the swap. Because there's like this swap is not synchronous. It doesn't happen immediately. There's a bunch of stuff under the hood that has to happen, because what we're dealing with are content processes. You have to send messages, and then like this telling it that, hey, you've done a swap, hey, you're focused now. All this involves asynchronous communication with the content processes that are involved here. And this tab switch, which occurs in the parent process, may or may not be waiting for some certain amount of events to occur or something. That's my sort of instinct, my intuition about what's happening here. So let's switch back to my screen here. So with that context in mind, let's now read Neil's comment. I'm gonna, before I read this, I want to just supply some context for some terminology here. Lowered is what is like under the hood. Our focus manager has this idea, and like I think operating systems also have this notion of like raising and lowering of windows. Whenever a window becomes the foreground, when it becomes focused, it gets raised. When it goes into the background, when it's blurred, it is lowered. That's generally the idea. And so that when you focus a window, you are raising it, and our focus manager goes like, okay, well, I will keep track of this focus window, and maybe there's an element within that window that is specifically focused. I think that's how it works. Again, focus is not my strong suit here. But here, let's read through this. I'm enough delay. Let's do this. So this is the success case. When the step 1, window lowered is invoked on the tab being dragged out. So that makes sense because we're trying to transition focus. When the user drags out a tab, they probably want to use that tab immediately. Like what our end goal is to have that tab then have focus. So we lower he says window lowered is invoked on the tab being dragged out. Send unset active browsing context is called to inform the parent process that this browsing context is no longer active. Okay. So the parent process clears the active browsing context. Then window lowered is invoked on the old parent process window. So that's the originating window. We say, okay, you're going into the background now. And then window raise is invoked on the newly created parent process window that we are doing our swap with. And then window raise is invoked on the new tab that was dragged out. And then send set active browsing context is called to inform the parent process that the browsing context associated with that tab is now active. So that is the success scenario. Let us now get into it. So when it fails, this is the interesting one. M active browsing context is null after the tab is dragged out. The steps that are happening are, different first step. First, window raised is invoked on the background tab, the one not being dragged. So the one that I guess we are switching to. So that tab switch seems to be occurring before maybe the window has been set up. So we do this switch and we end up focusing the background tab. And then send set active browsing context is called to inform the parent process that the browsing context for the tab that is being switched to in the originating window is now active. Then window lowered is invoked on the tab being dragged out, which now contains a blank page. Right, because I guess at this point we have not yet done the swaps. We have not completed the swap. And then window lowered is invoked on the old parent process window. Window lowered is invoked on the other background tab, the one that was raised over here. Send unset browsing context is called to inform the parent process that the browsing context for the other tab is no longer active. Then window raise is invoked on the newly created parent process window. And then window raised is invoked on the new tab that was dragged out. However, nothing here informs the parent process that this browsing context is now active. Essentially, the failure case has us trying to adjust the active browsing context in content for the process for the tab that we aren't dragging. In particular, active browsing context in content for the tab we are dragging is never modified during the tab tear-off process, so raising it at the end of step 6 just returns early. For the tab is never modified during the tab tear-off process. Oh, because there's active browsing context in Chrome and M active browsing context in content, is that? What's the difference between these two? Okay, let's quickly read what the difference is between these two. These are two members that exist. Here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. In the Focus Manager. And part of the confusion here might be, on my part at least, might be that we'll have a Focus Manager in the parent process, and I believe we also have one in the content process. So like depending on the context that the Focus Manager is executing in, what process it's in, it might be that it has a certain member populated in one process and a different one in the other. So let's read. In a content process, the browsing context corresponds to top-level web content in the active tab or null pointer if focus is not in a browsing context group that this process participates in. Synced across processes in a browsing context group. Sentence fragment. This field exists separately from mfocus browsing context in content instead of being derived from it, because for legacy reasons, the relation between this and this is temporarily broken when a window is being raised or lowered, not supposed to be used in a meaningful way in the Chrome process. So this is the one that we use in the content process. And then down here, this is the Chrome process notion of content's active browsing context in content. Avoiding field reuse for different semantics and different process types makes it easier to catch bugs. Okay, I can understand that. So they're trying to make it more explicit. So we don't just call it like M active browsing context and use the same member to mean two slightly different things in two different contexts, because the semantics are different. Okay, so the failure case has us trying to adjust the active browsing context in content for the process for the tab that we aren't dragging. When? I guess, when does this get called? Yeah, okay, right before. So we send a message up to the parent process saying, "Hey, I'm updating the content process is updating its notion of its active browsing context, sends an update to the parent." Makes sense. So let me reinterpret this again. Window raise is invoked on the other background tab, the one that is switched to, the one not being dragged in the originating window. And then its content process sends set active browsing context to tell the parent that the browsing context is now active. And in the good case, this never occurs, I guess. Trying to adjust the active browsing context for the process for the tab that we aren't dragging. In particular, M browsing context and content for the tab we are dragging is never modified during the tab tear off process. Are you sure? Because for the tab we are dragging is never modified. Yes, especially if they're in a different process. So raising it at the end of step 6 just returns early. That makes sense. Okay, so what he's saying is, oh, come on, search box. Okay. What he's saying is that the content process associated with the tab that is being torn out doesn't know that focus was shifted to a tab in another process. And so by the time step 6 occurs, it's like, hey, hang on. It's never modified. They kind of go out of sync is what effectively happens. Which is tricky. It's tricky. Okay. So that's the general idea. So then Heist comes in with a comment and says, okay, I'm not familiar with this code. So the following may be a dumb question. Why, in step 4, does the content idea of the BC not change? I don't know which step 4 he's talking about. Let's assume he's talking about this one. That seems like it fixed what happens in step 6. Yeah, I guess he must be talking about this one. As the active browsing context null and the browsing context being raised, the drag tab would be different. In other words, should we in step 4 be broadcasting the active browsing context being nulled back from parent to the other child processes? Or have I got the wrong end of the stick here? And then Neil comes back and says, well, that's part of the issue. The problem is that in step 2, a request to windowed lowered is called on the child process, but it doesn't arrive until after the browser swapping is happening. It doesn't arrive until the browser swapping is happening. When we drag out a tab, okay, I think we're getting really into it now. When we drag out a tab, the browser being dragged is moved to a new window. I think by swapping it with the new blank browser from the new window. That's right. That's correct. We don't actually move the browser. We just swap the contents. We then call blur at this point in the code. To switch away from the tab being removed to another tab. Right. Just focus after tab switch will attempt to focus the either the tab or the content. This thing. Set focus on the new browser. Let's switch away from in the success case, the old browser has not been removed yet. so we can blur it properly, or something else has already done so. In the failure case, we call blur on the temporary blank page. I see. This adjusts focus in the parent process properly, but fails during window lowered in the child process because that the code here thinks that the blank page is being lowered rather than the real page that it thinks is focused. Real page that thinks is focused. Here. The window, if we get the browsing context and we get the act browsing context, and if that's not the one, then we bail out. So window lowered is fired, but the conception of what the focused, the active browsing context is doesn't match, so it just dives out. And then it returns early, and this means that the active window never gets cleared properly. And Bernard comes in with some logging. When he's testing, he's seeing different results. The old tab starts off and the foreground is lowered. The new tab is raised with the expected URI. The parent process does things I haven't figured out. The old tab is raised. The new tab is lowered as it is now about blank. The new tab. Oh, right. The new tab is lowered. I guess we haven't done the swap yet. The parent process does more stuff. I think that's the swap. The old tab is lowered again. Then the new tab is raised and the copy bug is apparent. So he ran with Moz log to get some focus logging. With the resulting log, I replace the process ID. And then he has a patch that removes some of the window focus logic that was causing the copy context menu to be disabled. And it appears to solve the issue. And then Neil Deacon says, I think this change will affect what gets focused whenever a tab switch occurs. Maybe it would be possible to do this or something similar only when we know a drag to a new window is in the process of occurring. Mike Conley has a better understanding of the tab switching code. We should ask him for help here. And this might be hard to create a test for. So what I started to do yesterday, and I didn't complete, and I was hoping to do during this episode. I'm already half hour in, but I think we're now caught up with where I was yesterday. Is I took a stack, I collected a stack trace for this point that Neil identified, where we were doing the blurring. This is going to cause the window lowering that he mentions. Here. I wonder if we need to wait for the swap to have completed, because what we do right now is the parent process does not wait for the swap. Swap doc shells. We send an event to say, hey, we're swapping doc shells, and then we do the actual swap. We call it swap frame loaders, which eventually goes into our native code, I believe. Yeah, swap frame loaders is this thing that no .cpp over here. It's implemented in our particular case is on Zool frame element, and it's going to eventually call into frame loader owner, I guess. Am I wrong on that? I might be wrong on that. Oh, here we go. Yeah, swap with other loader. This is the real guts of it. This is where the real magic happens. Now, when this thing completes, does it send any kind of message that we could just kind of wait for or something? Reset in frame swap. Destroy frame scripts. Content chunk. We do all this rewiring of stuff. And then we say, hey, we're done. What does that do? This is going to do things like call page show, I think, and page hide. Like that's going to cause that stuff to happen. But it wouldn't surprise me if there's not a message being sent. Swap. Ooh, tell the browser. Wait, who's sending this? The child. The parent tells the child this, that, hey, you have been swapped. What does this do? Yeah, sorry. The code I was looking at before was running in the parent process, I think. So this is maybe what we're more interested in. Fire page show and page hide event for frame loader swap. Fire page show event for frame loader swap. Set in frame swap false. In frame swap. And then update the visibility state. Okay. That's, I think, important to know. The other important thing, if we look at the stack, this is kind of the important function here. So this is what runs in the new window that gets created. So when we do that tab tear out situation, we actually execute this routine in the newly created window, and its job is to both do the swap and then close the originator, the original tab, which now has about blank in it. And so a bunch of stuff happens, and the actual closing occurs here. And none of this, like all of this is synchronous. At least all the stuff in here is synchronous. And then we get to this point where like, hey, we're gonna do the switch now. So we call end remove tab. And I believe is that on the... No, it's actually at the point of swapping. Right, we fire this event. We fire this event called swap dock shells. Or end swap dock shells, rather. That gets fired. I think actually it gets fired inside of browser custom element. Yeah, here. And that is what the Async Tab Switcher is responding to. So the Async Tab Switcher, it's getting involved with all of this. And the reason it's getting involved is because it maintains internally this sort of mapping of tabs to their loaded state, whether or not they've got their... The terminology is a bit wrong today because now we have web render. I've got a bunch of terminology in my head with like layers, and I need to swap it out with display lists. So the Async Tab Switcher keeps this list in its head of which tabs have sent their display lists to the compositor, and which ones have revoked those display lists, rather, to say like I'm no longer relevant, so you can clear me from memory to reclaim space. I'm no longer updating, or I don't need to paint right now. And so the Async Tab Switcher, when it sees that the swap dock shells is occurring, what it wants to do is update its internal state for the loading state of the thing that just got swapped. So we respond to it here. The swap has happened. We reset the loading tab in case it has been swapped. We also set our browser state to whatever other browser state was before the swap. Clearing the load timer means that we will immediately display a spinner if our browser isn't ready yet. Typically, it will already be ready, though. If it's not, then we're probably in a new window, in which case we have no other tabs to display anyways, which is true. So we do the swapping, and then we say we swap their states between the two windows. We got this from something called the swap map. Whenever we begin the swapping of the dock shells, we like stash the loading state. If there's a switcher, and if not, then we do these things. All right. And then after this event is handled, this is where a bunch of async tab switcher stuff occurs to make sure that the DOM accurately represents the internal state of the async tab switcher. I am not a fan of the async tab switcher. I've worked on this code. It is probably, of all of the front-end code, the async tab switcher is my least favorite part. If there's anyone out there who wants to try simplifying it, making it easier to reason about, please do. There is documentation for it. You can read up on how it works here. Again, some of the terminology is wrong. We're talking about layers still. We should talk about display lists. But this kind of goes into like what's going on with the async tab switcher. I'm going to put this down here because it's a beast. It is a beast. And that's because we have to switch tabs asynchronously because content processes, you don't want to synchronously wait for them to paint because they might be like stuck, and then your parent process is stuck, and then you're super stuck. Okay, so we do all of this stuff in post actions after we've done the swap. And this function gets called update display. An update displays function is to make sure that we're displaying the right tab. And presumably we are entering, the visible tab will not be the same as the one that we're supposed to be showing because we're removing, the reason we're reacting to, well, hold on a second. Swap browsers and close other. Handle event, post actions. What causes the visible tab to be different from the show tab? What is the show tab? So what we can do actually, now that we've got our build ready, let's do some logging because that's always handy. We've got this like built-in log stuff. Log init. Here, log switch timing. Now this is I've always found this to be really difficult to interpret the logging. It's pretty terse, but it's helpful once you know what it's saying. There's some documentation for the logging down here, but it's been augmented since then. I think there's some documentation for the logging. Oh, not really. Okay, let's set the pref to get some logging. And what does it want? Boolean. Okay. So now whenever we switch tabs, we should see a bunch of stuff going into the console here. So we can move this window here. And you can see all the things it's doing. Now, one of the things we can also do is to reduce some of the noise. We can turn off tab warming. So that's going to reduce a bunch of activity. And maybe we'll realize that that's related to the issue. We'll see. But all right, we've got our build here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and reproduce the issue. So I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here. We've got our 2 tabs. Now I'm going to tear out. So first of all, yeah, we've got our copy. It's working. Tear out. Copy is not working. Now let's go here. So swap dock shells occurs here, and then we say switch to tab 2. And that occurs between the point of swapping and end swapping dock shells, is we say switch to tab 2. That's interesting. Because the show tab has changed. And what changed the show tab? Loading tab 1. Start. Initial tab is loaded. True. And then our tabs, we have the, again, this is like really, really kind of difficult to reason about. And we say, we're going to request tab 1. Right, because I guess we removed tab 2, which is the one we tore out. Loading tab 1. And then it's loaded. Or wait, tab 2. Loading tab 1. What is tab 2? Part of the issue as well is that we've got 2 windows kind of intermingling their logging here. That's going to add some complication. We could maybe add some identifier numbers. That might actually be helpful. Here, let's try something here to just sort of make things easier. Is we can have, this is just a cheap and easy way. Let GID equal 0, and then when we do our logging, there's a function that does all of the logging, which is come on, where is the logging? Cached, unchanged, log string message. ATS. Right, that's what it's supposed to be. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ID, I guess I'll say this.id in here. This is a cheap and easy way of doing it. And then when we initialize, we'll say this.id equals GID++. And I'll say log wait. Yeah, I'll put this here. Start so that we get our ID logged right at the beginning there. Okay, let's build and take a look. I'm seeing some chatter here. Looks like there is some, I'm not sure what random uneducated viewer is saying. It does not look related, so I'll just ignore. If you try to drag out tabs, it seems like it's kind of 50% if you get the copy to text or not. Yeah, exactly. It is an intermittent error. Like what we're dealing with here is asynchronicity, races, and communication between processes. So yeah, the bug is not going to reproduce 100% of the time. What we're hoping to do is tip the scales. Either eliminate the race. Ideally, we eliminate the race, as opposed to like making the race more likely to go one side or the other. That's... Oh, I think I have broken... I've broken it. I've broken tab switching. It does not like online 81. GID. Right, because of course. Of course. Casing was wrong. Tab switching is one of my least favorite parts of like problems that like I am not a fan. I've worked a lot on improving tab switching performance, and that's always been satisfying, but it's like it's a pain. Tab switching's a pain. Okay, let's do our tab tear out. So I'm gonna do that. Wait, why are we... Do we still have warming enabled? Oh, it's just from Moz after. I guess it's still being created even if we're not warming, even though it's not doing the warming. Okay. Oh, and we create a new one each time. Okay, that idea is not going to work. The ID will not work. What we need to do is put an ID on our tab browser. We need a unique ID on the tab browser. So yeah, what it'll do is expose. This is again not static get ID. Return GID plus. Okay. And then tab browser, whenever it creates itself, this dot ID equals async tab switcher dot get ID. I think that'll work. This is pretty sloppy, but you know, just doing what we can. Okay, so this dot, now can I get at the G browser? I believe I can. Our tab browser. This dot tab browser is what we want. This dot tab browser dot ID. Tab switcher is not defined. Fool, it's right here. Oh, right. That's what I want. And I think that'll get us our logging. Random on Edge Cave here says, you are a shitty streamer if you can't answer a question. Oh no. Let's see here. Let's open our tabs. So ATS 0, ATS 0 makes sense. Okay. Now let's do our tab tear out. Okay. Let's look at the log. Stop everything, look at the log. So it's all actually coming from one tab switcher, it looks like. And I can prove that. Let's actually copy this before we proceed with anything else. Let's copy this over to a note. Let's create a new note. Put this in here. Is that? I think I've got the wrong editor enabled. I need the Markdown editor. what I want to do is make sure that this thing shows ATS1. Yes, okay, correct. So that was working, and we didn't end up actually using abstract Async Tab Switcher 1. So here we go. Start. Initial tab is loaded true. And then when we started with this set of windows, we had 3 tabs. We had new tab, inventor of the snap P has a farm, and how the ballpoint pen. And it says that 2 is the second tab was visible. That's correct. And 0 through 1 were unloaded, and there were none cached. And then we decide to load tab 1. The inventor of the snap P. So that's what I want to know about here. Why do we choose to do this? We haven't even we haven't closed the tab yet. What causes us to do this loading of tab 1? Loading tab. There's a load requested tab. So somewhere request tab is called. Except, no, it hasn't. I don't see a request tab in here. Request tab equals here. The selected tab. Tab the user requested most recently. Chooses to load tab 1. So what I'm going to do actually well, let's go on for a second here. Okay, for some reason it chooses to load tab 1. Tab 1's loading. Tab 2's still loaded. 0's unloaded. And then eventually swap doc shells happens. And here we're saying like actually switch to tab 1. From tab 2 to tab 1. We asked to do the loading of it. Then we actually do the switch to it. Tab 1 is still loading at this point. Loading. At the point of ending swap doc shells, it's loading. It's loading. So what do we have displayed at this point? This one, visible. What does this mean again? Visible, remote. It's loading. VR. I have to remember what all this stuff means. Not my favorite logging language. It's the last visible tab. It is also requested. And then in parentheses, it is active and rendered. Okay. But it's still in the loading state. V means it's visible. It's not. Now about this blank stuff. What does that mean? non-blank. There's a chunk here that's like non-blank. Here. Add log flag. So there's a bunch of flags. And how do those work? If we're logging, then we say that our flags are for each flag. What is going on? If the flag is true, so 1 is yes, no is 0 for each flag that's being passed if we are logging, and then it pushes those flags onto this array, and the log flags at the very end, it adds them. So whatever there's a flag and then there's sub flags. Is remote, okay, on paint, and then the sub flags are like whether or not the switch paint ID and whether or not the transaction ID is greater than, I see, false, true. That's what that means. And then non-blank we don't have any blank tabs, so we're not minimized. We are remote, not busy, is not a local about page, and we have presented before. Okay. It's kind of redundant. Also is remote. Woo! That is something. That is something. And then we do report that we showed a spinner. Even though I don't remember seeing a spinner. Okay, let's do it again. This time I want more information. I want okay, so we're in the bad state here. Yeah, I want to know how we get there. So what I'm going to do, open up our debugger. Let's put this back. Let me bring the debugger over. And then we're going to say loading tab. Wait, what was the actual loading tab? Yeah. Sorry, not tab browser. Async Tab Switcher. Loading tab. And what we'll do is we can add a log. Load requested tab. And then let's also just dump the stack. I just want to see how we got there. Okay. Clear and drag. Okay. Swap browsers and close other and begin remove tab here. Line 3879. 3879 of tab browser. 3879. Right. We blur when we begin to remove the tab, and that happens okay. Okay. So when we call swap browsers and close others, there's two halves to closing the tab that we're about to eventually close. The first step is to, blur away from it. Line 4298. This starts the teardown. So let's start writing some stuff down, because I feel like we're starting to get a sense of the shape of this thing. So in the newly opened tab, or newly opened window, swap browsers and close other is called after the window loads. It then reaches into the originated window and asks the tab browser there to begin tearing down the tab that we're about to swap with. This causes that tab browser to begin the process of blurring that tab and switching to another one. Okay. Makes sense. And then we actually do the swap. Here. Then we actually do the swap. And in doing so, synchronously fire both the swap doc shells and end swap doc shells events in both windows, the originating and new window. Okay. When Async Tab Switcher sees that end swap doc shells has been fired, internally, for some reason, when update display is called, it decides to adjust focus before tab switch. And then followed not long after with adjust focus after tab switch. So let's go in here. And the blurring here is, I think, our problem. What we have focused is the background browser that we selected. And we blur it. And that is the part of Neil's story here. Window lowered is invoked on the other background tab, and that causes active browsing context in Chrome to be set to null. That's what goes on. Okay. But then Heiss has a very good point. Why doesn't step 4, does the content ID of the BC not change? It seems like it'd fix if the blah blah blah. It's part of the issue. The problem is that in step 2, a request window lowered is called in the child process, but doesn't arrive until after the browser swapping is happening. Window lowered is invoked on the tab being dragged out, which contains the blank page. Because the swap hasn't completed. You almost need to wait for the swap to be done. Fascinating stuff, eh? This is complicated business. Again, this is the intersection of focus and tab switching. And I'm tempted to like make it so that the Async Tab Switcher doesn't actually do any display updates until a dock shell swap has completed. I wonder how easy, like, I think that's pretty straightforward to do. Straightforward, and of all the things that this code can do, I think that's one of the more straightforward things we can do. On swap dock shells. Let's just do an experiment. Let's have a flag for swapping. This dot swapping equals false. And then on swap dock shells, what we'll do is when we enter here, swap dock shells, this dot swapping equals true, and we'll set it to false down here. And then in post actions, don't actually update the display if this dot swapping, if not swapping, update the display. I mean, this is just kind of like piling on more complexity, unfortunately. I always like it whenever a solution reduces complexity. This just adds yet another case. SmurfD says, and focus is in short functionality to keep what to have in focus. Focus is in short. The idea is we want to make sure that the focus. So if I remember correctly, part of this code, what it's dealing with is the fact that during a tab switch, which is asynchronous, the user might decide to change focus. So for example, they might initiate a tab switch, then there's a delay because the content process is blocked. In the meantime, maybe they focus the URL bar and start typing something. And we want to honor that. We want to honor maintaining focus wherever the user had put it, except in the case where they had the tab or the content focused, in which case, once the tab switch completes, we want to focus the new tab that was selected, rather. All right. Let's open some tabs. Okay. So, copy's there. Pull this out. Copy is not there. So, even though we didn't cause focus to change. In fact, let me log that as well. Blurring. I'll use console.log so it goes blurring, and then I don't need that. There are any I don't think I'm going to be able to solve this in the next 10 minutes. Maybe we'll be able to get a solution though. But I just want to forewarn you. I don't know if I'll be able to solve this bug. Okay. Blurring. We did do the blur there. Swap dock shells gets entered. So why did we... I think my guard isn't working. Erg. Swapping is false. If we're swapping... Setting swapping to true. Setting swapping to false. It might disappoint some of you to realize this is how sometimes I solve problems, but with the Async Tab Switcher, I find that this is oftentimes the best way to do it, unfortunately. Swapping is... All right. Oh. What's going wrong here? I think I've confused it. There we go. All right. Let's do our tab tear out. And let's take a look at the message. So swapping. Swapping is true. And then swapping is false. And then swapping is false, then swapping is false. What? So we... Oh my. Hold on a second. Do we not log state here? I think it might be time to do that. Dot log state. Okay. On swap dock shells. Whoops, I already have it open. Put you back over here. Okay. Swapping is false. Setting swapping to true. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here. Swapping is false. Swapping is false. Oh, right. Sorry. Swapping. Oh, of course. Swapping isn't running after swapping changes. That's why. But swapping true occurs. And then somehow over here, swapping is false. Even though setting swapping to false. Swapping is true. Could this be... I think it's slightly out of order, but I think I know what's happening. I think it's in the... It's not that the... we do this kind of work in the midst of a swap. We do it at the end of a swap. If, let's try this. If event string is not equal to end swap doc shells. That's a hack, and I don't think I'm happy with that solution. But I want to just see what happens if we do that. Okay. Let's open up some tabs. Open up some tabs. Okay. Copy. Tab tear out. Copy does not work. Why? Blurring. Another update. Stack. Or you know what? I'm going to say console.trace blurring. Let's try that again. Okay. Tear out. Tab removed. So do it anyways. Not for the end swap doc shells. We do it soon after in the tab removed event listener. Sorry, like 850. One, no. Tab switcher. Tab removed. Yeah, tab removed event. calls on tab removed. At the end of end remove tab. So not long after. So one of Neil's suggestions was, could we not do the document active element dot blur here? Like if you skip this, if we skip this blur, that should fix the issue. But there's a reason why we're blurring there. And maybe we should verify that that's the right thing to do still. But yeah, that's the work. So tear it out. So that fixes it, getting rid of that blur. Why do we do this? We clear focus so that adjust focus after tab switch can detect if some element has been focused and then respect that. We do it on purpose so that if a user focuses if a user has focused well, hold on a second. At this point when we do this, what is the focused window? Console.log focused window is me. Services.focus focused window equals window. And then active window is me. Maybe it's that simple. Maybe we don't want to blur if the currently focused window is not us, because we've just opened a new window. So maybe we just need an additional clause here that says, you know, a new window has just been created. I am no longer in the foreground. So why would I blur myself? It's not like the user changed focus to something in me. They just opened a new window. Okay, hold on. Tear out. Yes, it is the focused window. Yes. Because it's still in the midst of being opened. Like, let's watch this in slow motion. Like, just kind of slow your brain down and watch what's about to happen. I tear out. Whoop. Oh, sorry. I screwed it up. Here, let's try it again. I tear it out. It goes away, and then the switch occurs, and then this window is opened. So yes, I guess this window is coming, which is wild because the close is being initiated from a window that's not actually visible yet. Swap browsers and close others. That's happening inside of this load event listener. Stop the about blank load. What happens if, just to see, what happens if browser.js, like, when do we become, we haven't painted yet, we just loaded ourselves. There's no way we could have become focused. If tab to adopt, then dispatch event before initial tab adopted. What if we wait for remove the speculative focus on the URL bar to let the URL be formatted? Okay. What if we wait for ourselves to be focused before doing this? What happens then? This seems like a kind of bug that would be useful to have Pernosco trace of for what it's worth, says Emilio. Yes, my I agree. I'm not well versed in using Pernosco for things that are not crashes. I don't know how to do it for something like this where I have to interact with it and it doesn't crash. Like whenever I have a crash, and it's very straightforward for me to use Pernosco, but for like a user interaction bug like this, I don't know how to be effective with Pernosco. Oh, thank you. And maybe that's something I need to work on. Okay, tab tear out. So that might do it. Something false here. So if now we go over here, well, I guess we don't even need to do this part. I wonder if this will fix it. Like we wait until we're focused before we're about to adopt a tab. I guess part of the problem here is that the user might change focus. They tear out and then they switch focus to something else. And so the tear out doesn't complete. I guess that's a problem. Okay, I'm going to have to stop here because I have other things to go to. And I'm almost out of batteries. Jeez, yeah, I need to load up on battery. But I'm going to stop here. Emilio writes that it should be a matter of doing an RR recording with logging. And then maybe I know that there's a way of uploading an RR recording to Pernosco. And maybe that can help us sort through this. But for now, I think I'm centering in on something with this, but I am worried about waiting for focus because it's opening a window is, we tick the event loop while you're doing it. Your focus could change, and during that time, it's not guaranteed that the newly created window will be focused. And so we might never actually complete the tear out if we do this. But maybe there's a way we can signal the tab switcher that this is occurring so that it doesn't try and do the blur. All right. Well, something to think about. I have to go. Hey, thanks so much for watching episode 275 of The Joy of Coding. I hope that was interesting. Hang on, let me just put my notes together here. It was a deep dive, and I hope it helps illustrate some of the stuff we have to deal with tab switching. Let me know what you thought. The form for giving me feedback is in the agenda right here in this rate this episode. Let me know. I want to know whether or not this deep dive was interesting. It's been a while since I've done a really big deep dive. We did a little bit of one last week. This one was a real deep dive. And before that, we were doing a lot of like neat infos. There was a lot more variety. And I don't know what people are interested in, if these deep dives are interesting or not. So let me know. You can click on rate this episode. Let me know what your thinking is. I added a new question. If you have ideas on what the title of the episode should be, please let me know inside the rate this episode. And I never got to talk about Special Powers Spawn, but maybe I'll talk about that next week. And if you have any questions, put them in the rate this episode form, and I'll do my best to try and answer them next week. Okay, thank you so much again for watching episode 275 of The Joy of Coding. I hope that was interesting, and again, and let me know what you think of the background removal stuff if it was distracting. Should I switch back to my green screen? Let me know. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.
The joy of coding.
See ya.